The Islamic Revolution in Iran erupted in the late 20th century when only a few would anticipate it. The revolution that opposed the dependence of the Pahlavi regime on the West and oppression inside the country encountered a myriad of obstacles, created mostly by Western countries, spearheaded by the United States. To commemorate the Iranians' efforts in countering the aggression, November the 4th has been named the National Day of Campaign Against World Arrogance. On the occasion, numerous events are held in Iran on an annual basis. Greetings and a warm welcome to your weekly show, Iran Today. I'm Behruz Najafi. In this week, we will take a glimpse of the past events to examine the reason behind the antagonism existing between Iran and the United States of America. So don't go anywhere. November the 4th, 1979, 2 weeks after Mohammad Reza Shah gets the go-ahead to go to the U.S. on medical grounds, Iran is already the scene of anti-U.S. demonstrations. With clenched fists and at the top of their voice, the people shouted slogans against America that had sheltered the dictator it had backed for long years. On the same day, a number of students decide to capture the U.S. Embassy in Tehran.
The admission of the Shah to the United States actually gives that signal, and this is something that many of the officials in the State Department, in the embassy in Tehran, had indicated that this should not happen. They had predicted that if that happens, that would mean that a lot of unrest would happen in Iran. So they had predicted this. And so the students, they decided to take action, concerted action, which would prevent the trend of different plots against the Islamic Revolution, the chain of events, to break that chain of events. And they studied the different options.
The students had a number of options to display their anger of the U.S. policies. The options included forming a human chain around the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, or peacefully demonstrate in the streets, or throwing things like tomatoes to show their disapproval. There was this third option that the students chose, however, to take over the U.S. Embassy and occupy it for a period of 48 hours or even more to show their abhorrence towards U.S. policies.
Instantly, the news on the capture of the U.S. Embassy here in Tehran by students who called themselves the student followers of the Imam's line hit the world headlines. While the West and the U.S. condemned the move, most political parties in Iran praised it, especially after Imam Khomeini approved of it.
Indeed, takeover of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran was the young people's reaction to years of humiliation by the West and the U.S. in particular. More than anything, the occupation was a symbolic response to the America-loving and West-loving drives inside the country.
In the limited time they had, embassy staffers destroyed the documents. Still, the students took pains to be able to put together the shredded documents. They succeeded in recovering most of them. Among the recovered documents, one can cite a letter embassy staffer had written offering proposals to the White House, as well as 2 scenarios aimed at creating chaos in the country, aimed at the collapse of the Islamic Revolution. One proposal had to do with creating dissatisfaction among Iranian ethnic groups, and the other intended to provoke students to force the closure of schools and universities.
Let me share with you this point as my personal experience in a document and an analysis. Undoubtedly, had we not taken over the den of espionage, the 1953 Iranian coup d'etat would have been repeated, because most of the movements were similar to those which took place in the early 50s in Iran. Moreover, there were many authorities in the interim government who followed a similar train of thought with that of those who formed the 1953 coup. Once the embassy was taken over, the coup was no longer concerned, even though after the takeover the Americans targeted Iran by economic embargoes. But the sanctions were nothing new. They had already frozen our assets and had put us under pressure. As you may know, Iran had paid some $11 billion to the US before the revolution for buying arms, a deal that was never honored by the US. Washington hashed the Operation Eagle Claw in Tabas Desert, which, thanks to Lord, turned out to be a failure subsequently. As another move, the White House planned a coup led by Ali Amini, a US agent in Iran. Another Iranian agent, Shapur Bakhtiar, formulated the Nujeh coup for his part.
The situation was totally unexpected. The Americans were at a loss, wondering what to do. More than 50 of their embassy staff members had been arrested. The country that used to be their central foothold in the Middle East once had now turned into a great foe of American imperialism.
In the early 50s, the US teamed up with the UK to exert pressure on Dr. Mossadegh so that he accedes to their wishes. This is while neither Mr. Mossadegh nor the National Front, especially the Iran Party, regarded the White House as a colonialist power. They tended to consider it as a supporter of freedom and democracy, and this wrong belief continued to exist until the revolution in 1979. Under the Mossadegh administration, beginning in April 1951 through August 19, 1953, the country was subject to constant US-led pressure, plots and interference, while state officials were unable to counter them.
What prompted the Iranian students to do this? The US influence had infiltrated in all aspects of Iranian politics. Even it had affected the appointment of Iranian authorities. During the realm of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, American advisors came to Iran in droves in order to engage in economic, military, and even political activities. The Iranian kingdom had westernized the culture so much so that the society members that were mainly religious could not tolerate it anymore.
They displayed Iran as an anti-Islamic state which acted against the interests of other Islamic countries. This could not be swallowed by any Iranian, especially by the revolutionary community. The clerical community found it impossible to see the country become a US lackey in the region, which brought with it too much dependence and humiliation for the nation. Iran was becoming an anti-Islamic power which suited only Israel's interests. This could never have been taken up by Iranians.
In the eyes of Iranians, probably the biggest blow to the US credibility was the ouster of the government of Prime Minister Mossadegh in 1953. The Shah had left Iran and the country was practically being run by the then Prime Minister. Dr. Mossadegh had managed to nationalize Iranian oil and also defended this move both at The Hague and the United Nations Security Council. While the Americans staged Operation Ajax, staged a coup d'etat against the national government, and brought the Shah back home.
در حقیقت اگرچه کودتا با همکاری انگلیس بود.
In fact, even though the UK facilitated the coup, the US absolutely manipulated the whole project. During the last 25 years of Mohammad Reza Shah's throne, the US orchestrated all types of pressure, crimes, betrayals, tortures, imprisonments, captures, and executions in Iran. And this is all besides looting our oil and gas as well as mineral riches. It was the White House that engineered formation of the Savak. In effect, they sought to fully restructure the country. They installed their agent Ali Amini as the prime minister in 1961 to have him pass two anti-Islamic and anti-sovereignty bills, the State Associations Bill, and another one which ruled out necessity of taking oath on the Holy Quran in courts of law. However, Islamic societies harshly debunked the motion. After 2 months of a struggle, the administration apparently retreated and did not pass the motion.
The formation of the coup government was followed by exerting pressure on the society and the crushing of the opposition. Opposition leaders got detained and put behind bars. Their newspapers were shut down, and those that remained had no right to make any objection whatsoever. More pressure was also piled on religious people, and even Ayatollah Khomeini was sent into exile for protesting the country's dependence on the United States.
We were pursuing our political cause under the guidance of Imam Khomeini ever since he was in Iraq's Najaf. We were completely aware of Imam's deep understanding of the ongoing current in the country, and had already realized that the US, by forming and manipulating the SAVAK, Organization of Intelligence and National Security, intended to check on all revolutionary activities across the country. It was through the SAVAK that Washington tried to quell anti-Shah and anti-US uprisings in Iran.
Despite the little improvement on the economic front that was on the back of oil sales, freedom of expression was further fading away. The founding of the Organization of Intelligence and National Security, or SAVAK, and also America's unsparing support further aggravated the political gagging. The organization that was initially proposed by the Americans was the first body that embarked on training the staff. It is said that until the 1979 Islamic Revolution in Iran, more than 100,000 political prisoners were in jail because of SAVAK's operations. Conduct of horrendous tortures had become common practice in such a way that even independent Western organizations disapproved of them. All this happened when the Americans were throwing their full weight behind the regional ally, the Shah.
Among these SAVAK detainees, no one can be found to have a criminal record. SAVAK claimed they arrested people for numerous criminal charges, however. All the captives were wits. A review of their backgrounds shows this. They were all thinkers and leaders in their fields, but were kept behind bars in gaslit dungeons. The ones SAVAK agents captured were free of any charges. Many of them were killed by the agents in Pahlavi prisons in those years. They were revolutionaries who really cared about their country.
With the advent of the Islamic Revolution, the White House accorded it recognition. However, the information attained from its embassy later and the coup d'etats it tried to hatch indicated the fact that it still believed it was possible to return the Shah to Iran and to keep the country under its thumb.
So if the U.S. embassy was not taken over, I think those activities would have continued, and there was a serious danger of hosting a group of more or less intelligence officers that are aiming to overthrow your government through different tactics. Maybe using the tactic of coup d'etat would not work again, but there are other means of pressuring a government.
The arrival of the Shah in the U.S. raised the ire of the Iranians. The fury was manifested in their capture of the U.S. Embassy. The slogan of "Death to America" was also heard more frequently than any other time.
The United States of America, by sheltering the Shah of Iran, intentionally dealt a blow to the Iranian nation's emotions and dignity after they had dethroned the monarch. Providing protection for the Shah after the revolution reminded the nation of the bitter memory of U.S. interference in another national movement, where just 25 years earlier, the U.S. and the UK provided shelter for the Shah outside of the country and brought him back to the throne after curbing the national campaign. The people feared the same scenario would be the case and the Shah would be brought back to power by the U.S. after a while.
Imam Khomeini, who realized that the Americans would not be genuine in according recognition to the Islamic Revolution, approved of the embassy capture. After the incident, the U.S. imposed sanctions on Iran and froze its assets. The Iranian parliament, that was tasked with determining the fate of the U.S. embassy in Tehran, issued the order to release the Americans 444 days later. We asked Asgharzadeh about the reason for the long delay in releasing the American hostages.
The general consensus, both in and out of Iran, was that Shah's entrance to the US soil after remaining a staunch ally of the US for more than 25 years after the 1953 coup was much more than a solution to the issue and had clear political reasons. This spurred people's hatred against the US, as it was manifested in the US Embassy takeover. When the embassy was invaded by a number of students, it sparked a lot of interest in the Iranian society, which went beyond ideological preferences. It became evident how much the people supported the revolution and cared about their leadership.
The Americans' hostile attitude toward an independent Iran did not change in any way. By offering arms and intelligence contributions to Saddam Hussein during his 8-year war against the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Americans tried to take revenge on the Iranian revolutionaries. Abetting Saddam was just part of Washington's hostile actions against Iran. In a separate move, the Americans even fired at an Iranian passenger plane, causing the death of all the people on board. In addition, all-sided sanctions made things so tough for the Islamic Republic.
Among Washington's mischievous acts against the Islamic Revolution was the imposition of all-out sanctions and getting the support of European countries, providing support for the revolution's opposition trends, helping Saddam Hussein to attack the country with the hope of bringing down the revolution, in addition to coup attempts and supporting their leaders and organizers, and attempting to harm the revolution in whatever manner possible. Moreover, the White House, disregarding all international regulations, blocked Iranian assets abroad.
Some analysts argued that the takeover of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran was the main reason for Washington's enmity toward Iran after the Islamic Revolution. They believe the move did not make any contribution to the development of the revolution in Iran in any way. However, the revolutionaries beg to differ.
I believe that takeover of the den of espionage reshaped Iran's foreign policy structure. Neither East nor West, but Islamic Republic was the motto of Iran's foreign policy then. The approach implies a kind of independence seeking. However, takeover of the US Embassy made the motto look like Iran is seeking animosity against the US. The move gave birth to some kind of anti-Western attitudes in Iran's new foreign policy structure. All this was aggravated by the imposed war, however.
That event was a very exceptional event in a very exceptional time circumstances. As I mentioned, we had no official and strong government at that time. We just had a provisional government. Revolutionary Council was running the country. It's very different from where we stand today as a strong nation state with all the different a strong administration, government. So it is very different, the circumstances that we had in those days. And I think that the fact that the students and Imam and many politicians, many observers, and what the students found in the embassy later on in the documents, I think that all together indicated very well that the students took action at a very correct time, and that could have prevented actually another coup d'etat against the Islamic Republic of Iran.
To save its staff members and to save face, the U.S. embarked on launching military operations against Iran. The result was a catastrophic defeat in Tabas Desert. The Iranian students' move shattered the mythical and undefeatable image of the U.S. power in the eyes of the world.
Taking over the U.S. Embassy dramatically changed international presuppositions about the U.S. Until then, all the countries in the world looked at the U.S. as an insurmountable power. No one could have ever imagined that U.S. spies could be kept inside Iran for a period of 444 days without Washington being able to do anything about it. This marked the U.S. international grandeur.
In the post-war years, the Americans resorted to other methods, as attributing terrorism to Iran and putting the country on the so-called axis of evil list with aims to isolate the nation. Iran's nuclear program crisis was another plan that started in mid-2002. They managed to issue a number of UN Security Council resolutions against Iran and to impose the harshest sanctions in history on the Islamic Republic. Marathon negotiations between Tehran and Western powers in the past decade have always hit the world's headlines.
Whenever the U.S. acknowledges the dignity of Iranians, the ground shall be prepared for restoring ties between the two nations. From an Islamic standpoint in international relations, no ideological, political, and natural differences can be regarded as the real barrier to formation of bonds between the two countries so far as Iran is concerned. What is keeping the two countries from reaching out to each other is the White House's expansive demands of Iran. Once the U.S. ceases to put forward its excessive demands of Iran, recognizes the right of the Iranian nation, and stops interfering, invading, and blocking assets of Iran, and ends supporting its enemies, and threatening the nation, the Islamic Republic of Iran would readily re-engage with the U.S. no matter how different the two countries may be politically or ideologically.
With the Rouhani administration coming into office and the selection of Zarif as the leader of the Iranian negotiating team, an agreement was reached after 2 years that managed to satisfy all the parties to the talks. This was the first time ever that Americans turned to diplomatic means in dealing with Iran. Accordingly, Tehran favored the idea, yet approached it with caution.
I believe that the JCPOA's main achievement is that there is no longer any worries about the Islamic establishment being overthrown. In other words, the global community has recognized Iran's establishment. The endorsement of Resolution 2231 by the United Nations Security Council to turn the terms of the JCPOA into international law, which has been recognized by nearly 190 countries of the world, is a proof that the world has officially approved of the ruling establishment in Iran. I view JCPOA as our pathway from the pre-JCPOA period, which abounded with fears of the overthrow of the Islamic government of Iran, to the post-JCPOA period, which will be an era of stability, security, economic prosperity, and international interactions.
The historical experience of Iranians has proved that one should not trust the Americans easily. Close to 4 decades of enmity toward all the pillars of the Islamic establishment, overtly and covertly, is nothing to be wiped off from the memory of the Iranian people and statesmen. That is why Iran is dubious about the Americans' designs. Iran's leader has advised the statesmen to be cautious about Washington's infiltration.
We've
also tried this several times. What was the Algeria Pact about? Did it honor its promises? Remember the nuclear issue. Despite the fact that the leader said he knew they would not honor their commitments because they are not righteous people who tell lies and have approached the negotiating table with deceitful intentions, but we will display a heroic flexibility toward them to exhibit our honesty and the other side's mischief. During this nearly 2 years, was the matter finally solved after all?
That is why the slogan of Death to America still exists in the political literature of the Iranian people and chanted during religious and political events. Iran's leader has asserted in his recent speeches that by chanting the slogan, the Iranians protest the White House's arrogant policies toward the country, not the American people.
Don't have any problem with the American people. Americans that visit Iran are surprised by the level of warmth and hospitality that they receive. What people have difficulty with is U.S. foreign policy. So debt to America is debt to U.S. foreign policy, not debt to American people. And in order for that slogan to become useless, U.S. foreign policy needs to change.
To get to know about the people's opinions, we took to the streets to ask them about the U.S. and the policy it is advised to adopt toward Iran.
Having seen events like the 1953 coup, as it was orchestrated by the US, students grew restless and attacked the US Embassy in Tehran.
The students were always at the front of any movements in favor of insurgencies that led to the revolution. The occupation of the US Embassy was no exception.
Iranians bear grudge against the US for the troubles it has caused for us. I believe that it is a rightful view. They always try to prevent us from getting our rights by imposing economic, scientific and financial sanctions on us.
Every country would naturally react to anyone who seeks to deal a blow to them. If you feel danger, you will cut off your relation with the source of danger. However, I believe that relations between nations shall not be severed only because their governments are not on good terms.
Arrogance is a way of bullying. In other words, I may be stronger than you and force you to comply with my orders and do as I wish, and in case you want to do something against my will, I will hinder your progress.
The special situation in the Middle East region and Iran's undeniable role in controlling the situation is something that cannot be denied by any American official. Now, a number of observers are of the belief that the signing of the JCPOA is just the very first step toward attenuating the antagonism existing between the two sides. Well, that's a wrap for this edition of Iran Today. Join us next week and find out more about what's going on in this country. Thank you for watching. Goodbye and God bless.